The boy wasn't supposed to be there. That's what the security guard would say later to anyone who asked. The plaza outside Hartwell Financial Group was private property technically, and the benches near the fountain were meant for employees taking their lunch breaks, not for kids in worn-out sneakers carrying a paper bag that had seen better days. But nobody had told that to Eli. He was 11 years old, small for his age, with dark eyes that took in everything quietly, and a habit of sitting very still when he wasn't sure what to do next. He'd learned that stillness early. When you grew up in a two-room apartment with a mother who worked double shifts and a grandmother whose hands shook when she poured her morning coffee, you learned that the world moved fast and loudly around you, and sometimes the only safe thing to do was hold very still and wait for it to settle. He was waiting now. The fountain wasn't running. Some kind of maintenance issue, a worker had explained to him when he arrived, though the man had been mostly talking to his phone. Eli didn't mind. He liked the empty basin, the way the afternoon light hit the dry concrete and turned it almost golden. He had 40 minutes before he needed to be at the bus stop on Meridian and 5th, and he'd already finished his homework on the ride over. The paper bag held half a turkey sandwich and an apple his grandmother had packed that morning, pressing it into his hands the way she always did, with both palms wrapped around his, as if she were handing him something precious. He was thinking about eating the apple first, when the man in the suit sat down 3 feet away from him and put his face in his hands. Eli watched him. The man was maybe 60, maybe older, with silver at his temples and the kind of suit that looked like it cost more than Eli's grandmother made in a month. His shoes were polished. His watch caught the light. Everything about him said that he belonged somewhere important, somewhere indoors, somewhere that was not a dry fountain plaza in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. And he was crying. Not the showy kind of crying, not the kind Eli had seen sometimes on the subway, when someone was performing their grief for the car. This was quiet and private and clearly embarrassing, because the man kept pressing his fingers against his eyes like he was trying to push the tears back in. Eli looked away. He opened the paper bag and took out the apple. He turned it over in his hands. Then he looked back at the man. "Sir," he said. The man didn't look up. "Sir, are you okay?" The man lowered his hands slowly. His eyes were red. He looked at Eli the way people sometimes looked at him in the grocery store when he was buying specific things with the EBT card, like they were trying to figure out what category he belonged to. "I'm fine," the man said. His voice came out rough. Eli nodded. He held out the apple. The man stared at it. "I have a sandwich too," Eli said, "but the apple's better. My grandma picked it herself." Well, not herself, like from a tree. She got it from the market, but she picks through all of them until she finds the best one. She does that every time. Something moved across the man's face. Not a smile exactly, but the shadow of one. "I can't take your apple," the man said. "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you." Eli set it on the bench between them. "My name's Eli." The man looked at the apple for a long moment. Then he picked it up. "Vincent," he said. Vincent Hale had not cried in public since his wife's funeral 7 years ago. He had prided himself on this quietly, the way men of his generation prided themselves on things they didn't discuss. He had sat in the front row of St. Catherine's Church in a dark suit, and held his son's hand and kept his face very still, and he had not broken until he was alone in his car in the parking structure afterward, where he sat for 45 minutes with his forehead pressed against the steering wheel. He had not expected to break today, not here, not on a bench outside the building. He'd spent 30 years building into something. But the board meeting had lasted 4 hours, and at the end of it, his son, his own son, Marcus, 29 years old and sharp as a letter opener, had looked across the table and said, calmly, that it might be time for Vincent to consider stepping back, for the good of the company, for the direction they were trying to go. The room had been very quiet after that. Vincent had nodded. He had thanked everyone for their time. He had walked out of the building, through the lobby, past the security desk, out the revolving glass doors, and sat down on the nearest bench, and that was where the 7 years caught up with him. He ate the apple. It was a good apple, crisp and slightly tart, the kind that required both hands. He ate it slowly, and Eli sat beside him eating his sandwich, and they didn't talk for a while, and that was all right. "You go to school around here?" Vincent asked eventually. "Jefferson Middle," Eli said. "On Clement Street." Vincent nodded. He didn't know Jefferson Middle, but he knew Clement Street. It was 6 blocks from a neighborhood he'd driven through for decades without ever really seeing. "Why are you here?" he asked. "At the fountain," Ellie shrugged. "I come here sometimes after school. It's quiet. I like to think. What do you think about?" Ellie considered this seriously, the way children did when adults actually asked them questions instead of performing the asking. "Mostly about my mom," he said. "She's in the hospital. She's been there for a while." Vincent was quiet. "She's going to be okay," Eli said, in the same tone of voice Eli's grandmother used when she said it, which was a tone that had learned not to carry too much hope because hope had let them down before, but also couldn't give it up entirely because what would be left then? "The doctors say she's stable. That means she's not getting worse. That's something," Vincent said. "Yeah." Eli folded the paper bag neatly. "My grandma says you have to hold on to some things." Vincent looked at him. This boy, 11 years old, sitting on a bench with his homework done, and his grandmother's best apple given away, and his mother stable, which meant not getting worse, which was something. "She sounds wise," Vincent said. "She is." Eli glanced at him. "Why were you crying?" Vincent almost smiled. He'd forgotten that children asked things directly, without the elaborate social scaffolding that adults constructed around difficult questions. "I think I just found out that the thing I spent my whole life building doesn't really need me anymore," he said. Eli thought about this. "That's like a good thing and a bad thing at the same time," he said. "Yeah," Vincent said. "It is exactly like that." He didn't expect to see the boy again. He walked back into the building, took the elevator to his office on the 14th floor, and spent the rest of the afternoon in the particular kind of numbness that follows a very large blow. He responded to emails. He approved 2 contracts. He let his assistant bring him coffee he didn't drink. On the drive home, he thought about Marcus. About the angle of his jaw in the meeting, so much like his mother's. About the way he'd said for the good of the company with such conviction, such clean certainty, as if he'd rehearsed it many times, which he probably had. Vincent didn't know whether to be furious or proud, and the inability to decide between the two exhausted him. He came back to the plaza the next afternoon because he'd left his umbrella on the bench, which was not entirely true. He had left his umbrella, but he also could have sent someone for it, could have let it go, and he hadn't. Eli was there. He was at the bench again, textbook open this time, chewing on a pencil eraser with the focused expression of someone doing math they found annoying. Vincent retrieved his umbrella. He stood there a moment. "How's your mom?" he asked. Eli looked up. He seemed neither surprised nor unsurprised to see him. "Same," he said. "Stable. Still something." "Still something," Eli agreed. Vincent sat down. He wasn't sure why. He had a meeting in 2 hours and emails stacking up, and a son who wanted him to consider stepping back, and none of that moved him off the bench. They talked for almost an hour. Eli told him about Jefferson Middle, about his science teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, who made everything about volcanoes, even when the curriculum was supposed to be about ecosystems. He told him about his grandmother's apartment, how it smelled like coffee, and the specific laundry detergent that had been discontinued twice but kept coming back, how there was a crack in the ceiling above his bed that looked exactly like the state of Florida if you turned your head a certain way. Vincent told him about Hartwell, how he'd started it in a 2-room office, with second-hand furniture and 1 employee who was also his best friend. How he'd watched it grow into something real, something that employed almost 800 people, something with a name people recognized. "Is that your son's company now?" Eli asked. Vincent paused. "Not yet," he said. "Maybe soon. Are you mad at him?" "I don't know what I am." Ellie nodded thoughtfully. "My grandma says being mad and being hurt feel the same from the inside. You have to wait for them to get quiet before you can tell which one it actually was." Vincent looked at him. "She says a lot of things," Eli offered, a little apologetically. "Don't apologize for that," Vincent said. "She's right." He started coming to the plaza regularly after that. Not every day, but most days. He told himself it was because he liked the fountain, which had since been repaired and was now running quietly, and the bench had good light in the late afternoon. And he needed somewhere to think that wasn't his office or his empty house. He stopped telling himself things that weren't true around the 3rd week. He came because of Eli. The boy had a quality that Vincent couldn't name precisely. It wasn't innocence. Eli was not an innocent child in the soft, protected sense. He knew too much about hospitals and food budgets and what stable meant when the doctors used it in a certain voice. But he was present wasn't quite the word either, though that was part of it. He paid attention. He said what he actually thought. He asked questions that went straight to the thing, without the careful professional performance of not asking. Vincent had spent 30 years in rooms full of very intelligent people who never once said what they actually thought. He hired someone to look into Eli's situation, quietly, without fanfare. He wasn't sure what he intended to do with the information. He told himself it was just to understand, the way he always said he just wanted to understand things before making decisions. What he found made him set down his coffee cup and sit very still for a long time. Eli's mother was named Claire Sutton. She was 33 years old and had been a licensed practical nurse before the accident. A car accident, 14 months ago, a wet road who ran a red light and walked away without a scratch. She had been in and out of the hospital 3 times since then. The most recent admission 2 months ago, a complication from the original spinal injury that the doctors were cautiously optimistic about, which was a phrase that meant many things. Eli's grandmother was named Helen Sutton, 71 years old, retired from the school district, a widow for 9 years. She was raising Eli while Claire was in the hospital and had been doing so on her retirement income and the remains of a small settlement that was moving toward gone. There was no father in the picture. There hadn't been for a long time. Vincent read all of this and thought about a boy sitting at a dry fountain, giving his grandmother's best apple to a stranger because the stranger was crying. He sat with it for several days. Then he called his lawyer. He didn't tell Eli right away. He wasn't sure how. There was no protocol for this, no precedent in his experience for how a 62-year-old widowed financier was supposed to tell an 11-year-old boy that things were going to be different now. He kept coming to the bench. Eli kept being there. The fountain ran. The days got a little shorter. One afternoon, Eli arrived looking wrong, quieter than usual, his shoulders pulled in, the careful stillness doing different work than it normally did. "What happened?" Vincent asked. Eli didn't answer immediately. He sat down and opened his backpack and took out a folder and then put the folder away without taking anything out of it. "The doctor called my grandma this morning," he said. "About my mom." Vincent waited. "They said she might need surgery, a big one." Eli turned the backpack strap over in his hands. "My grandma was on the phone for a long time after. She didn't know I could hear." He paused. She was asking about cost. The word cost in Eli's mouth carried the weight of every conversation Eli had overheard in 11 years that he wasn't supposed to hear. The weight of a grandmother trying to sound steady on the phone, while a child 3 rooms away held very still and listened. Vincent looked at him. "Eli," he said. The boy looked up. "I want to talk to you about something, and I want you to know before I say it that this isn't about owing or charity or any word that makes you feel smaller. This is about something else." Eli watched him with those dark, level eyes. "I've been thinking," Vincent said slowly, "that I've spent a lot of time building things, and not enough time thinking about what things are actually for." He paused. "Do you understand what I mean?" "Kind of," Eli said honestly. "Money is a tool," Vincent said. "That's all it is, a very powerful tool, and I have a lot of it, and I have not always used it well, or thoughtfully." He looked at the fountain. "Your mother's surgery. I'd like to help with that, and with whatever comes after." Eli was very still. "Not as a loan," Vincent said. "Not as anything you'd have to think about paying back. He searched for the word, and found it in something Eli's grandmother had apparently said once, which Eli had passed along without knowing what it would become, as a something. Eli didn't say anything for a long moment. "My grandma would want to meet you first," he said finally. "I would expect nothing less," Vincent said. A small sound escaped Eli then, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something at the threshold between them, the way relief sometimes lives right at the edge of grief before it tips over into something you can breathe with. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" Helen Sutton was a small woman who had the particular posture of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that the world was going to try to diminish her, and she was simply not going to allow it. She had silver hair cut short and practical and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and when Vincent Hale sat down across from her at her kitchen table, she set a cup of coffee in front of him, without asking, and folded her hands, and looked at him like she was reading a report. "Ellie says you've been meeting him at the fountain for almost a month," she said. Yes, ma'am. He says you were crying when he first saw you. I was. Helen studied him. Why? Vincent told her all of it, the board meeting, Marcus, the 30 years, the apple. He told it plainly, without the self-pity he'd been carrying privately, or the defensiveness he might have used in a different room with different stakes. Helen listened. She didn't fill the silences. When he finished, she picked up her coffee cup and held it in both hands. My daughter almost died 14 months ago, she said. She may still have a hard road ahead. I have a grandson who does his homework at a public fountain because his room is small and quiet is hard to find here. She looked at Vincent steadily. You want to help? Yes, because of Eli. Because of Eli, Vincent said. And because I think I've been confused for a long time about what success actually looks like. And he stopped. He tried again. He gave me his apple, he said simply. He didn't know me. He just saw that I was hurting. Helen was quiet for a moment. He's always been like that since he was small. It used to worry me. You can't go through life handing your apple to strangers. No, Vincent said. But you can make sure the strangers are worth handing it to. Something shifted in Helen's expression. Not softened exactly. She wasn't a woman who softened easily, and Vincent respected that, but shifted as if a weight had moved somewhere more manageable. The surgery, she said. I have a team of people who can find the best specialists, Vincent said. Not just any surgeon. The best available for this specific type of injury. And afterward, whatever the recovery looks like, whatever she needs, I'd like to make sure it's there. And what do you want in return? Helen asked. The question was not aggressive. It was clear-eyed and fair. Nothing, Vincent said. This is what the tool is for. Helen looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, a bus went by, the hydraulic breath of its doors opening and closing. Coffee's getting cold, she said finally. Vincent picked up his cup. Claire Sutton came home on a Thursday afternoon in early spring. She came home walking, slowly, with a cane she would need for several more months, and probably some days after that, but walking, which was not a word any of them had been confident about a year ago. The surgery had gone the way good surgeries went, when you had the right surgeon and the right team, and the procedure was exactly what was needed, and the patient had the particular stubbornness of a person who had too much to get back to. Eli was waiting on the sidewalk. He had been trying to look calm about it all morning, with very limited success. His grandmother had finally told him to stop reorganizing the books on the shelf, and just stand outside if he needed to move, and so he was standing outside in his good jacket, with his hands in his pockets, and his heart doing something complicated that he didn't have words for yet. The car pulled up. The door opened. His mother stepped out. She looked the same and also not the same, the way people did when they'd been through something that changed the architecture of their face. Not the features, but the expression underneath the features, the thing living behind the eyes. She was thinner. She moved carefully. She looked at Eli with an expression that took all of him in at once, the way mothers did, and her face did something that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite smiling, but was both of them with no space between. "Hi, baby," she said. Eli crossed the sidewalk and put his arms around her, carefully, the way she needed, and she held onto him with one arm and the cane with the other, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Vincent was parked across the street. He had not planned to come. He had arranged the car, the discharge, the home care that would start Monday morning, and he had not planned to be there personally. But he had gotten in his car and driven here anyway, and now he sat and watched a boy who had given him an apple hold his mother on a sidewalk in the early spring light, and he thought about what his wife used to say. She used to say that grace was the wrong word for the things that happened when you least expected them. That grace implied you'd done something to deserve it. What she meant was something more like gift, something given freely, without accounting, without ledger, something given the way an 11-year-old boy at a dry fountain gave the best apple his grandmother had picked out just because he saw someone who needed it. He was going to step back from Hartwell. He'd told Marcus that morning, on the phone, in a conversation that had been long and difficult, and also, somehow, the most honest conversation they'd had in years. Marcus had cried a little, which surprised them both. Vincent had not cried, which also surprised him. Maybe the crying was finished, or maybe it had just moved somewhere quieter. He was going to take a seat on the board. Advisory, not operational. He was going to travel. He had a list of places Diane had wanted to see that he'd put off for 30 years, and he was aware, in a new and unclouded way, that the time for putting things off was not unlimited. He was going to stay in touch with Helen Sutton, who had already sent him 2 articles about a community garden initiative she thought he might consider funding, and who texted with the particular authority of someone who had decided that since she was communicating with him, she might as well be useful about it. And he was going to keep the bench. He hadn't told anyone this, but he'd inquired about a small naming plaque on the fountain. Something simple, nothing grand, the kind of thing most people would pass without reading. He was still thinking about what it should say. He hadn't found the right words yet. Across the street, Eli's grandmother appeared in the doorway, and Claire looked up and began the slow and careful walk toward the steps, and Eli stayed beside her, close enough to catch her without making her feel she needed catching. Vincent thought about 30 years of building. About 800 people who had jobs because of something he'd started in a 2-room office with second-hand furniture. About a son who had his mother's jaw and was probably going to run the company better than he had. And he thought about an apple. Slightly tart, the kind that required both hands. Given without hesitation by a boy who had very little and understood, without needing it explained, that having very little was not the same as having nothing to give. He put the car in drive. He had somewhere he wanted to be.